Okay, good morning. Now, today's lesson is course 3. It's lesson 5, and we're going to discuss fractional parts. It's not a very long lesson, so you'll be happy with that. So get out your notes, and let's get started. All right, here's the title again, Fractional Parts. And you have a few to talk about, words that you already know. So we often use fractions to describe part of a group. And a fraction has, as you know, a numerator and a denominator. So the numerator, this is what you want in your notes right here. The numerator is the top number in a fraction, and that tells the number of parts that they are describing. And then the denominator is the bottom part of a fraction, and that tells the number of equal parts in the group. All right, so to find fractional parts of a group, what we usually can do, and we want this in our notes, it says we can find a fractional part of a group by dividing by the denominator and multiplying by the numerator. So this would be an example. If you wanted to find 3/4 times 32, it would involve really 2 steps. So what most people will do is they'll take the 32 and they'll divide that. So divide that by 4, divide that by the denominator. That would give me 8, and then we multiply that by the numerator. So 8 times 3 is 24. And that's one way to find fractional parts. That is not the only way. All right, so let's look at an example. All right, example 1, you want to have all your examples need to be in your notes. So you need to write this down. So there were 30 questions on the test. 1/3 of the questions were true and false, and 2/5 were multiple choice. And question A says how many questions were true, false, and B is how many were multiple choice. So first of all, we know that we have 30 questions. So I have 30. And then true, false is 1/3. So I'm going to put a 1/3 right here. So I'm going to do 1/3 times 30. And the way we just learned to do that, which you already know, so this is review. Let me erase this. What you're going to do is you're going to divide 30 by 3. So 30 divided by 3, so you divide 30 by 3, that gives me 10, and then multiply by the numerator. So that's going to be 10 times 1, which is 10. So 10 were true and false. Then it says how many were multiple choice. We're going to do the same strategy. It says 2/5. So if we have 2/5 and we're multiplying that times 30, then what we're going to do is we're going to take the 30, divide it by the denominator. So 30 divided by 5, and you can write that over here, 30 divided by 5 is 6. And then I multiply that 6 times 2. So 6 times 2 gives me 12. So 2/5 of 30 is 12, and 12 were multiple choice. All right, so that's one example, and that's how to find a fractional part. Now let's read down here. All right, the next part of what we're talking about today is comparing fractions, so you want to write that down. And the strategy that we're going to use to compare fractions that they're teaching in this lesson is to determine, so here's your strategy. Strategy we can use to determine if a fraction is greater than or less than a half. So in comparing fractions, we're going to look at each fraction and we're going to compare it to a half to see if it's greater than or less than a half. So that needs to be in your notes. All right, so to estimate the size of a fraction, we compare the numerator to the denominator. This is how you do this. For example, if Tyler read 3/10 of a book, then he has read less than half the book, because 3 is less than half of 10. So 3/10 is less than a half. So if Taylor has read 3/4 of the book, so let's write down 3/4, then she's read more than half of the book because the numerator 3 is larger than the denominator 4. So 3/4 would be greater than a half. So this is just one strategy that allows us to compare fractions. So let's look at example 2. Okay, so example 2, write that down, and it says arrange these fractions from least to greatest. You have 3/6, 3/5, and 3/8. Now some of you can do this visually, but in your notes I'd actually like for you to draw these little pie charts here. Alright, so what we're going to do is draw 3/6, and you know how to do that. So we have 3/6, shade in the 3 of the pies, of the pieces of the pie. Then you have 3/5, and then we have 3/8. So draw all of these. You might have to pause this. And now we're going to compare these, each one of these fractions to a half. So 3/6, let's look at that one first. How does that compare to a half? Well, if you look at the pie chart, or you even know 3/6, you know that it reduces to a half. So 3/6 is equal to 1/2. 3/5 you can see is greater than a half, and 3/8 you can see is less than a half. So just knowing how these compare to a half, it's very easy for us to put these in order from least to greatest. So look down here, this is your answer. We see that 3/8 is the smallest, then 3/6, and then 3/5. Okay, let's go to the last example. Alright, so example 3, write it down. It says compare 2/3 of an hour and 2/5 of an hour and explain why your answer is reasonable. So we need to know which one is bigger, 2/3 or 2/5. Notice they both have the denominator of 2. I mean, a numerator of 2. The denominator is different. So let's compare 2/3 to a half. Is that greater than a half? Yes, it is. So we know 2/3 is greater than 1/2. 2/5 is less than a half. So which one is greater? 2/3 of an hour is greater than 2/5 because of that, comparing it to a half. All right, pretty simple stuff. We start out the book very easy. It gets harder, I promise you. All right, let's go to your practice set. All right, so here's your practice set. You have 4 practice problems. Have fun doing those. Do those in your notes, and you can ask questions when you get to class. That's the end. Have a great day.